Okay. Making sure that you can hear me. Making sure my audio works. It actually sounds pretty quiet. Let me see if it's my speakers. Making sure it's the right microphone. It's also really quiet. I am so sorry for that. Let me try to fix that. I only have the one microphone. I do have another one I can hook up if this is going to be super quiet. Okay. I check it on my other computer to make sure that it all goes through. And also, if you have any questions, I can see it on the other screen since this laptop that I'm using is pretty small. It doesn't let me see the stream and also show the screen at the same time. But if you are here, welcome. This is our first student engagement hour. I figured it would be a good time to go over some of the more complex things that you'll be dealing with as far as how it relates to data warehousing and business intelligence. And then if you guys had any questions about anything, there'll be time for that now. If you don't have any questions or you're watching this later, you're obviously welcome to email me or reach out at any point. I know we are still in the first weeks of the class, and it is probably been an easy week. The first week it was one assignment, and now we're getting into some heavier stuff. I do have the second assignment pulled up. It is a longer assignment, and I figured it would be a good place to start. So I can get right into it. So when you think of data warehousing and business intelligence, they are not often immediately put together, even though we have them together in this class. So one of the things that data analysts do is they look through data, either in data warehouses or databases or through analytics or in data lakes, and they are trying to answer a question. Now, the question can be posed from leadership, from the C-suite, from their supervisor. And sometimes the answer is not readily available through the data, and you have to dig, or they call it massaging the data, or you may even have to reframe the question. So here is an image of the data analytics life cycle from the analyst's point of view. So you have your problem definition, which has your data requirements, and then there is some data collection where you're going to get this information to find your answer. Sometimes the data has to be cleaned and prepared in a specific way to be loaded into the data warehouse. But in this situation, you want to filter out any outliers or any special cases that don't generally apply to the rest of the answers in your data predictions. Then you will do the data analysis of it. You will be looking for answers to questions or maybe even forming your own questions. And then you'll create your analysis modeling. And then that turns into the communication portion where we will visualize the data and show it to people in a way that they can understand and they can take away what it is that you are trying to get across this as the message. So understanding how data warehousing is important for storing the data, managing the data, importing the data is the first step. And then the second step, the second half of the class, will be all about taking that data and turning it into something meaningful to show others and hopefully get your point across or create the action that is needed on behalf of, the C-suite or the manager or the marketing team. So if we take a look at what a data warehouse looks like on the back end, see, this was all in this area here where we were getting the data, and we got the data from the storage layer, and we were working to make the presentation here. Your data sources can be just about anything. They can be from CRMs or ERPs. They can be from SQL or NoSQL databases. They can be the Internet of Things devices. Amazon and networking companies and the web uses a lot of the Internet of Things in their data acquisition. Spreadsheets and flat files as well. In the original version of this class, the process was to take a flat file and upload it into a data warehouse, and you had to build the transfer protocols, and there'll be a little bit of that, but it won't be so crucial to the point where if you make one mistake, like if you spelled something wrong or you had a capital letter, the whole process would fail. And in real life, it's not that drastic, but in the teaching environment that we had, it would cause a lot of headaches, which is sad. So we have this new system, and this is the first semester that we're working with it. And when we get to the review section at the end, when you guys get to do your surveys, I would really love to hear if you felt like this was a good class, or if you have any criticisms about the information that you were given to learn and the tasks that you were given. That would really help out, since this is the first year or the first semester that we're doing this course, and I can improve it based on your feedback. It's also nice to hear if there was anything that you thought was well done, because that also gives me hope. And I can continue on the same way. So we can now look at the data flows, which is the process of moving the data into the staging layer and then into our storage layer. And you'll be working with that this week. And then later on, there is more in-depth about the data flows, because that is one of the most important parts of a data warehouse, is getting the data flows correct. So this is the actual assignment for this week. So we're just going to take a look at it to get an idea of the data. So here is the hierarchy information where we have the categories, and then here's the texts, and those are the short descriptions. Here are the attributes. So if it's a category or weight, something that's standard across all of the items in that particular section. And then over here is the transactional data. So if they purchased 15 of HT 1105, and this is the name of that coincides to the HT 1105. And they can pull this information and see how sales did for HT 1105 for certain years or months or over time. That's what it looks like without the lines. So in this section of data, you can see the varying pieces, but not necessarily how they would fit into a data warehouse. Through this, we'll do some of that. So we start with our data source here. There will be a DTP, a data transfer process, which then coincides with fields that we put in the database or the data warehouse. And then we can apply a transformation to connect to some data store objects. In this and in the previous class, there were some standard elements in the database that were there for the entire company. And it would be things like region and addresses of customers, so customer data, and sales information and the costs of good manufactured. So you can combine all of these things into a composite provider, which you can then run queries on, and then it would get extracted to Microsoft Excel. We're going to talk about this process right here. Thank you. Thank you for the coffee. So you'll read through all of these and and go through the exercises. And I don't want to duplicate the work that you're going to do with my Jabber. So right here, once the data flows, the data has been put into place with its composite provider, with the data transfer process, and you go to pull this information from the composite provider. Doing this just once seems like a lot of work to just pull one query. So to be able to see this information over time, so obviously companies have sales every day. There are transactions, people visit websites, Amazon gets data based on what you have spent time on the page looking at, Facebook tracks how long you were on a video or how long you read something or if you click to open it. LinkedIn does the same thing. If you interact with a post or you expand it so that you can read that information, all of that is tracked. And so every night that needs to be sent to the data warehouse, because a data warehouse does not get edited. There's no update queries run on the data warehouse in the sense of like I'm going to say CRUD database, which is where the data is written from those transactions. So that first spreadsheet we showed where the data was, that would be the database that is changeable and transactions are written into it. Sometimes there's returns, right? So then the returns are written in. Sometimes there's a void and a credit card slip. And so maybe that isn't processed until the next day. So then that transaction has to be modified. But all of that stuff has already been moved over to your data warehouse. So there will be a transaction log and dating inside each of the data warehouse schemas, either the star schema or the snowflake schema, to track when the data has been updated. And then you can use that information, that date timestamp, to find the most recent data, to find the best fitting data, not just necessarily for minute by minute queries, but also over time. So you can see, like on Amazon's page, because Amazon's such a big user of data, it's great to use them as an example. But the number of returns, the rankings, how many people were unhappy with an item. Sorry, I grabbed my coffee. One of the things that Amazon does, which is probably not something that they should do, is if you return an item, your negative review is not displayed. So if you buy something and you are displeased with it and you don't return it, or you do return it, then and you left a negative review, they remove your review because technically you didn't purchase that item. My dog is making noises. So you will perpetually have data being loaded into your data warehouse through the data flow modeling. And then your composite provider and your query is how you will limit what information is given to what people. So through the composite provider, you can limit the fields and areas that people can see. And through the query itself, you can limit that even more so that you can have, say, a composite provider set up for sales that has a lot of information in it, but the marketing department only gets one set of information through their query. So this chapter later on is all about how to model the data flow, which is a deeper dive into what I was just talking about. as far as moving the data. And you can see that there's the possibility of having many transformations. Just give me a second. The dog and the cat were not having a good time. So you can see here that sometimes there's multiple ways, multiple flows of data, more transformations as it goes through. And so you go from your source system and you check it for errors, you check it for null values. Let me back up, sorry. Null values, you'll check to make sure that area codes aren't incorrect, zip codes aren't incorrect, street names are all the same, things like that to get it into the system. And then you will make your transformations based on that information in the data sources into your info providers. So this is the visual representation of how it would work if you were using the SAP system. These little icons here are the data transfer process, and then this is the transformation. And inside the transformation, you'll get to do some of that as you go through. So here's some modeling and some other things as part of the future assignments. And it will, there's a whole video on it, and it will help you understand better why good data is important, because of garbage in, garbage out, obviously. One of the, I can go put up this image. One of the stories that I have about this sort of data progression is, sorry, when I worked at Deaconess, we had a lot of data, things that were like salaries of, so you have nurses, you have RNs, you have LPNs, you have BSNs, you have nurse practitioners, and then you have like the clerks that, can check you in and, bring you back the first time, get your weight, things like that. So they're all different types of nurses in, say, a urgent care unit. So in the urgent care unit, we had a number of people being paid per hour, and the issue that they were trying to solve was, it seemed like there were a number of nurses sitting around that didn't have something to do because the clerks were doing a lot of the things. They were bringing the people back to get their weight. They were bringing them in and checking their blood pressure and their temperature and all that stuff. They were getting the initial information. And so then they would go and get the nurse, and then the nurse, based on whatever was going on, would come in, and then they would get either the nurse practitioner or the doctor to come in, and then they would verify their information and figure out what was needed for the patient, and then they would prescribe that. So they would leave the room, they would get the prescriptions, they would do the things that they did out there as far as like writing up the record, setting up any sort of follow-up appointments, and then they would have one of the nurses walk them out. And so, or the nurse that had seen you walk them out. So they had analyzed how much time people were waiting in the waiting room, which was a substantial concern, right? Because you're in urgent care, you don't want to be sitting out in the waiting room, because there's only one person checking people in, and she's the same person who brings people back. Or the nurse, the LPN, is waiting for somebody to be in the room, or is waiting for the doctor to need a prescription, or the nurse practitioner is waiting for someone to need a prescription, and is just waiting. So the waiting was the problem, especially when all of them are being paid. So my friends who worked in the data analytics side of IT and marketing went through and figured out how everybody was kind of spending their time. And then they came up with a workflow for the urgent care office. So you go to the urgent care and you go and you check in, and then you sit and you wait and you wait and you wait. Now, obviously, they've streamlined some of the urgent cares so that if you came in and you needed stitches, and it wasn't one of those urgent cares that could handle stitches, they sent you right to the ER. That's great. So they would have you, they'd sit you down, they get your information, they put you in the waiting room. Then one of the lesser paid per hour nurses would come and get you and take you to the scale, do all your check-in stuff, talk to you about what was wrong, put it all in the computer, and then the depending on the seriousness of it, obviously, because if you have something super serious, then they do try to get the nurse practitioner to you sooner, or the physician, the doctor, if that was who is overseeing that urgent care. But if it's something slightly minor, like you need a physical, or if you just have a low grade fever and a sore throat, then the mid-tier nurse comes in and checks you and takes care of all that stuff and puts all the information in the computer, takes your temperature, does your swab. If you have, so maybe you have strep throat, something like that. And then that weight that sits, and it does the thing while they're going through the rest of it. And so your test is being done in the lab that is adjacent to your urgent care or in the urgent care itself. And then they get all of that tidied up. The nurse practitioner or the doctor, they consult with them to get the prescription written. The nurse practitioner or the doctor, if they are not seeing anything incorrect with the process that the mid-tier nurse did, they okay it. They send in the prescription, oftentimes to a pharmacy right next door, and send the person on the way, especially if it's a physical, things like that a nurse can do, a not necessarily requires the physician to be right there. Then the person's in, the person's out, they're given their prescription information, any next call visits, or their physical is taken care of. If they have to go to the pharmacy, there's a pharmacy right next door, and they get their medicine, and then they go home. So they did this whole data plot on how it improved the situation. So they showed two data plots. One of them was where there was a big chunk of, it was a bubble plot, and there was a lot of money being spent and patient satisfaction was down. And each different urgent care had a ranking based on their obviously reviews and satisfaction surveys and how much was per hour salary was being put into it. And then once they streamlined this, patient satisfaction went up because people felt like they were being seen sooner. They had more time with the practitioner and didn't feel like they had been handed off to two or to three other people. They had the ability to have the time, not just a single person where they didn't have to explain it more than once, but they got the time to cover everything. The nurses had more time to explain things. And conversely, the nurse practitioners or the doctors or the highly paid technical people had more time to be with the patients that really needed their attention. So they weren't there doing physicals or were waiting for something to happen. And overall, patient satisfaction went up. We streamlined some things so people weren't sitting around as much. And there was an overall improvement in employee satisfaction because I'm sure you can imagine clerks and secretaries that were running around doing all these things were feeling kind of grumpy that, the LPN or whatever. And this is not anybody in particular, but like the LPN who was getting paid twice as much as them was sitting there doing nothing because they didn't have that one task to do that day. So they would sit there and do their nails or talk on the phone or do whatever. And obviously that doesn't happen in every situation, and not every urgent care has a bunch of people sitting around. and especially after COVID, things got um, real lean and streamlined because like we all had to get in and out of those facilities without getting sick from anybody else. But that was one of the things that we had figured out right before COVID happened, which was great because we already had streamlined processes. So that's my example of how a question or data, depending on whether you start with data and come up with a new question, or there's a question asked and you're given the data to find the answer in, can help spark change and also improve situations, especially in environments where patient care is an issue, customer satisfaction, even in the website. On the website, I get tons of information as far as the data analytics through Google, and I can see when people find the pages interesting versus uninteresting. I can see when they stay and read versus when they leave right away. So does that help me make some decisions as far as what needs to be on the pages? Absolutely. A/B testing is also important, but we're not here to talk about specifically that, just about data in general and ways to look at it and ask questions and bring it into a data warehouse and then use that data to create stories, which hopefully will enact change for the better. I don't see anybody's messages. I don't even know if anybody's watching. I'll post this in the Discord. Post this in Blackboard, and I've made a recording of it, so you guys can watch it at your leisure. And again, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out. And I hope you have a really great day.